I grew up in a small town in western Pennsylvania where nothing ever really happened. It was one of those places where everyone recognized every pickup truck that drove down the road, and the loudest thing you usually heard after dark was a train passing a few miles away. My parents had lived in the same house for over 20 years, and the woods behind our property stretched farther than anyone in the neighborhood ever bothered to explore. As a kid, I built forts back there and never thought much about it. Looking back now, I wish I had kept thinking of those woods as nothing more than trees. Last January, I came home from college for winter break because my classes didn't start again until the end of the month. My parents still worked full-time, so I spent most of my days alone in the house playing games, watching movies, or helping clear snow from the driveway whenever another storm rolled through. About a week before I was supposed to leave, my parents got a call that my grandmother had been admitted to a hospital nearly 3 hours away. They packed a few things and decided to stay overnight so they could help my aunt the next morning. I told them I'd be fine on my own. I had stayed home alone dozens of times before, and nothing about that night seemed different. Around 8 that evening, they pulled out of the driveway, and I watched their taillights disappear through the falling snow. I locked the doors, turned on every outside light, and settled into the living room with pizza and YouTube playing in the background. By midnight, the weather had gotten worse. Thick snow covered the backyard, and the woods behind the house had completely disappeared behind a curtain of white. I remember checking the Ring cameras from my phone just because I was bored. The driveway camera showed nothing except blowing snow. The backyard camera looked normal too, although visibility was terrible. Around 1 in the morning, I headed upstairs to my bedroom. My room was on the second floor overlooking the backyard. There wasn't a deck or balcony outside my window, just a straight drop to the frozen ground below. I left my TV on quietly while scrolling through my phone. At exactly 1:17, according to the screenshot I took later, I heard someone quietly say my first name. It wasn't loud. It sounded almost like someone standing right outside my window speaking through the glass. I froze for a second before convincing myself I'd imagined it. The TV was playing softly, and I figured my brain had mistaken a voice from the video. Then it happened again. This time, there was no mistake. My name came from directly outside the window. Slow, calm, almost gentle. Every hair on my arm stood up. I muted the TV and listened. Complete silence followed. I walked over to the window but didn't pull the curtain back immediately. Instead, I stood there trying to hear footsteps or movement in the snow below. Nothing. Finally, I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. All I could see was darkness, snow, and the reflection of my own room in the glass. The motion light in the backyard wasn't on, which meant nothing had crossed the sensor. I checked the Ring app again. The driveway camera was still fine, but the backyard camera suddenly displayed "camera offline." I refreshed it several times with no luck. I assumed the cold weather had killed the connection, although it had never happened before. I texted my parents, asking if they had ever seen the backyard camera disconnect during storms. They didn't answer because they were probably asleep. I tried to laugh it off, closed the curtain, and climbed back into bed. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard my mother's voice. "Honey, open the window." My entire body locked up. It sounded exactly like her. Same tone. Same calm voice she always used when she didn't want to wake anyone else. For one impossible second, my brain almost accepted it. Then reality caught up with me. My parents were nearly 3 hours away. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my mom. She answered after the second ring, sounding half asleep. I asked where they were. She sounded confused and said they were still at the hotel near the hospital. I didn't tell her what I'd heard because I knew it sounded insane. Instead, I made up an excuse about checking whether they'd arrived safely. After hanging up, I sat in complete silence, staring at the bedroom door. About 15 minutes passed before another sound broke the silence. This time, it wasn't a voice. It was a slow scraping noise directly above me. At first, it moved from one side of the roof to the other. Then it stopped. A few seconds later, I heard what sounded like slow footsteps. They were heavy enough that I could actually feel faint vibrations through the ceiling. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to be walking carefully instead of running. The footsteps crossed above my room, paused, then continued toward the front of the house before stopping completely. I stayed frozen in bed, barely breathing. I finally worked up the courage to open the Ring app one more time. The driveway camera suddenly showed a police cruiser driving down a nearby road several houses away, but my backyard camera was still offline. That's when my phone buzzed with a motion notification. It simply read, "Motion detected, backyard camera." I tapped it immediately. Instead of loading a video, the app displayed an error saying the footage couldn't be retrieved. Seconds later, the notification disappeared from the app altogether. I remember feeling something I had never experienced before. It wasn't panic. It was the overwhelming certainty that someone was outside the house and somehow knew exactly where I was. I quietly left my bedroom, went downstairs, and grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find. I wasn't planning to confront anyone. Holding it just made me feel slightly less helpless. I locked myself inside the upstairs bathroom because it had no windows and only one door. I sat on the floor listening. For nearly 40 minutes, I heard nothing except the furnace turning on and off. Then, without warning, 3 slow knocks echoed somewhere downstairs. They weren't on the front door. They sounded like someone knocking on the wall itself. 3 knocks. A long pause. Then 3 more. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I simply stared at the bathroom door while trying not to make a sound. Around 3:10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. When I answered, a calm voice identified himself as a police officer and asked if I was alone in the house. My stomach dropped. He explained that one of my neighbors had seen flashlights moving through the woods behind our property and reported suspicious activity. Officers were already outside and wanted me to come downstairs only after they announced themselves at the front door. 10 minutes later, they searched the backyard and eventually found fresh boot prints leading from the tree line to the side of the house directly beneath my bedroom window. Hidden behind several snow-covered bushes was a 30-foot extension ladder leaning flat against the ground. The officers asked if it belonged to us. It didn't. They searched the surrounding woods for nearly 2 hours, but never found anyone. Before leaving, one detective quietly told me something that has stayed with me ever since. He said the ladder had been positioned directly below my bedroom window, not by accident, but with enough distance to avoid triggering the motion light. Whoever had placed it there had probably watched the house before and knew exactly which room was mine. I moved into an apartment near campus 2 weeks later, and my parents eventually sold the house the following summer. The new owners renovated almost everything, including cutting down part of the woods behind the property. I still think about that night whenever someone calls my name unexpectedly. The police never identified who left the ladder there, why they copied my mother's voice, or how long they had been watching the house before deciding to come that close. Sometimes not knowing is far more terrifying than finding out the truth.